made the time to be here today. This is the first session of a global, something that we have denominated the Global Landscape of Philanthropy webinar series. So we are here today to discuss and reflect based on this report that we launched on January 2018, what is next in philanthropy. For that, we have three speakers today. Andrew Milner, that is the author of the report, who will be the moderator for this session. Then we will have Felix Oldenburg from the Association of German Foundations, who is running something called the Next Philanthropy Initiative. And also we have Allison Hollowell from AVPN, the Asia Venture Philanthropy Network, who will provide us a lot of inspiration around the new models of philanthropy. So very welcome to you all, and I will pass to Andrew, but before I invite you to join us for the next sessions that are on March 29th and May 7th. And we will discuss around collaboration and power issues. So Andrew, the floor is all yours. Thank you very much for being here. And I really hope we have a very good session. You can leave your questions on the Q&A box that is next to your chat box on your windows. And welcome to you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nadia. Yeah, it's Andrew here, Andrew Milner. As Nadia's just said, I was responsible for compiling the Global Landscape report, which came out in January last year. So what I'm going to do over the next 5-10 minutes is just give a sort of bit of background and pick out some of the headline findings from the research. You'll see a slide on your screen now, which is the only one I'm going to use. And those are the sort of headings I'm going to vaguely talk around. So here we go. Okay, first, as nobody will be surprised to see that philanthropy has grown very considerably over the last sort of 5-10 years. That's true both of individual and of institutional philanthropy, although I have more to say about institutional philanthropy. Generally, there are a number of things behind that. The growth of disposable income in a lot of economies, government encouragement as funds for state welfare provision come under pressure, and also more publicity for philanthropy generally. Things like the Giving Pledge and more recently in France, the Changer par le don, with major donors more willing to talk about giving. We shouldn't exaggerate that though, because there's still some ambivalence in some parts about big philanthropy, especially those with more welfare-based sort of system, government system of welfare. There are also new trends in giving as well, which have helped to sort of give a stimulus to philanthropy, such as online giving and crowdfunding, which are becoming increasingly significant. Foundation numbers also are growing throughout the world in places so different as China and France. And at the same time, this is what you might think of as the classical model of the foundation, which invests its assets who knows where and then gives away a small proportion of the proceeds, is now not the only model. There are many different ways of working. More foundations are using more of their assets to achieve their purpose. We're seeing things like mission-related investing, impact investing, social investing, and it's not just in the way they invest their endowments or their assets, but it's the way they work with partner organizations. They don't only make grants, but they give loans, and they use more sort of for-profit type, market type instruments. And they're also looking for ways to use the convening power and their intellectual capital. We have examples like the Heron Foundation in the US, for instance, which now claims it uses all of its assets in pursuit of its mission. Again, it's easy to exaggerate this. This is still a minority occupation, but it is a growing practice. There are probably few foundation boards around the world which won't have at least discussed the different use of assets. And also, foundations are now not the only game in town, as we'll probably know. There's the example of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, for instance, which is an LLC. There are similar vehicles around the world, as well as the US. Arnold Ventures as well, which is very recently set up as an LLC. So people are finding different ways to do basically philanthropic work. And following on from this, this is worth underlining. I think possibly the most significant trend of all is that the distinction between the for-profit and the non-profit sectors is no longer as clear as it was. As I said, funders are beginning to use a greater range of instruments. These equity, loans, etc., etc. This is especially prominent, I think, in Asia. Annie Chen's RS Group, for instance, based in Hong Kong, makes grants but doesn't see themselves primarily as investors. They don't use the name foundations. If you go to the AVPN conference, for instance, Allison will probably say a word about this later, you'll come across a lot of organizations who don't see themselves in the traditional philanthropy mold. You get businesses with a social interest, social venture organizations, social investors. The name foundation tends to be less used there. At the other end of the scale, if you like, the implementing organizations, you're seeing more social enterprises, social businesses, entities that combine some element of profitability or the for-profit model in what they do. We're also seeing governments taking account of this too, and introducing more favourable legislation to allow that sort of form to thrive. So we mentioned government encouragement. So government likes philanthropy, does it? Yes and no. Governments are keen to encourage some forms of philanthropy, but not necessarily others. Generally speaking, they like the sort of philanthropy that goes to straightforward welfare causes, traditional things like healthcare, education, things that are not seen as politically sensitive. In other respects, governments tend to clamp down on things that they see as political, using a variety of means to do this, from prohibitive legislation to burdensome bureaucracy. In fact, I think the International Centre for Not-for-Profit Law recorded 98 laws restricting freedom of association or assembly around the world since 2012. So on the one hand, governments, yes, do like philanthropy, but they don't like sort of philanthropy they see as interfering in their sphere. There's some very notorious examples of this. Probably the Foreign Agents Law in Russia is the best known one, and also the Foreign Contributions Regulations Act in India, which many observers just feel is being used for sort of overtly political purposes to sort of stifle some forms of activity. Community philanthropy, we're seeing the growth of that. The most obvious form of it is the community foundation, but it's not the only one. A few things behind this again. They're local, they're more in touch with local needs than international intermediaries tend to be. And often they're more about building relationships and trust than they are about raising money. In fact, they're more, you could call them more community builders than conveners rather than funders. They've also got a very effective mouthpiece in the Global Fund for Community Foundations, which is helping to sort of spread the word as far as they're concerned. Digital technology, clearly this is going to be important. It's making itself felt in a number of ways already. The most obvious is in terms of online giving, but there are obvious implications too for data gathering and for manipulating it in more sophisticated ways. And the widespread availability of smartphones is affecting the consumer side too. Solve Education in Asia is exploring ways to make use of the smartphone technology to develop educational programs. They can reach children who don't necessarily go to school, but who do have a smartphone. And increasingly, NGOs and funders will be exploring new ways of working to capitalize on technological developments. At the moment, while it's obviously going to be important, it's hard to see exactly the shape of it. I suspect the reason for that is most of us aren't that techie, but it will be a biggie for the future, I'm sure. Data, generally speaking, surprisingly, what came up again and again in the research was the absence of not necessarily data, but of good data. That's even the case in countries which are pretty well off as far as sort of research institutes and infrastructure is concerned, even in Europe. Moving on to infrastructure, this slide says it's often absent where it's most needed. It's got a key role in stimulating philanthropy and providing a voice for it. But in places where philanthropy is just developing, it's often in short supply. A couple of people in the research pointed out the crucial lack of a sort of umbrella body in India, for instance, which is hampering development of philanthropy there. Social movements, obviously sort of given a stimulus by the use of social media. They're presenting a challenge to most funders. Again, they're going to be important in the future, but finding them and engaging with them is proving very difficult. but again, they're going to be significant. Collaboration. I think again, one or two of the other presenters will have a word to say about this. It's a growing preoccupation for funders, but so far it's more talked about than done. The Sustainable Development Goals, for instance, specifically call for it. But there's also the realization among funders themselves that philanthropic resources are limited and they like to achieve more in combination than they are alone. And we're not just talking about money here. The complexity of problems means that no one organization has either the intellectual or the technical capacity to fix things. So, but it remains difficult. Although it's important, it's difficult because different organizations have different cultures, as we know. Even within the same sector, foundations tend to, one of their keynotes often is independence. So it's they're working against their own grain in some ways. So it takes time. It takes a lot of patience in a world where we're beginning to see sort of time running out in a lot of problems, and there's a general sense of urgency. Talking about the SDGs very quickly, whether you like them or hate them, they're going to be part of the international development scene for the next 10 plus years. Some foundations, institutional philanthropy, has taken it on, some not so much. Most are still struggling to see how and where they fit and what their role might be. There's often no concerted plan of action in the sector within a country or between sectors. So that's one to watch for the future. Okay. That about does me. Why is next philanthropy important? The report is now a year old already, and in that time things have moved on. We're in a very dynamic environment, and if I can borrow a quote from the next panelist, Felix Oldenburg, foundations are built to last, but philanthropy is changing all the time. If it's going to make a significant contribution, it needs to be able to see what's around the next corner and needs to be ready for it. So with that, I'd like to bring in Felix Oldenburg. Felix is Secretary General of the Association of German Foundations, which is the largest membership organization in Europe in philanthropy. He's also chair of the Council Foundations Network in Europe, better known as Daphne. He's going to tell us a little bit about the importance of Next Philanthropy generally, and he's going to talk specifically, I think, about the hashtag Next Philanthropy initiative, which he's centrally involved in. So, Felix, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Well, and let me use the opportunity to say thank you so much for the Global Landscape report. I've got it on my desk, and it's the one report that has stayed on my desk for many, many months, and I refer to it quite often also in our strategy debates. It's a brilliant piece of work, really is.
Good.
But it doesn't answer all questions. It's not a looking glass into the future. And what could be? The information about how philanthropy is changing is more distributed across the world than ever before. All of us as infrastructure organizations, all of us as philanthropy practitioners, we only ever see a tiny portion of it. But we have to make our plans. For me, as an association executive, I have to know where my next members are going to be, how philanthropy may be changing in my country in order to know where I have to be, what topics I have to prioritize. If I'm a grant maker, I would want to know who are my future partners. Are there potential sources of support for my grantees that I don't see yet? So we've got a very changing landscape of philanthropy. I would say it's exponentially accelerating that change. It's coming from more corners than ever. And what could be an answer other than a brilliant report, a more ongoing answer to help us all find our individual responses to that changing picture? That's basically the question that has led us to the Next Philanthropy Initiative, which is nothing that I am leading. It's a completely open collaboration, and maybe we can advance to the next slide, please, between a number of support and infrastructure organizations, and it's an open consortium. You can join if you like. This is an open-ended collaboration that shares information about where philanthropy may be going. It shares interesting new philanthropic organizations. It shares interesting analysis and reflections. It shares data. And the way it shares that is through an email account that we all share and that we all contribute to. We provide tags to it so we can find information. And we all derive from it our own products. In my case, for example, for the Association of German Foundations, we distill a best-of weekly to our board members to help them stay abreast of global developments. We also have in our member magazine a double-fold page on Next Philanthropy, and we host a number of breakfast events. Now, Alliance has a section on their website. AVPN has just hosted a Next Philanthropy conversation in Myanmar a couple of days ago. And so everyone will use this information in different ways, and we have agreed to all use the hashtag Next Philanthropy when and where we share content through social media. So we've only been doing this for a couple of months, but we already see that we've all smartened up in significant ways, and the activity around Next Philanthropy is growing. Some of it is labeled Next Philanthropy, other content isn't, but maybe to the participants of this webinar, if that's something you subscribe to on social media, I think that's going to be a source of information and insight that's only going to grow in value the more of us use it to share content. Next slide. It's, of course, too early to say. It's too early to say where Next Philanthropy may be going. But we have a number of hypotheses that we can distill from the content that's been shared so far. And some of it, you may say, that they're no-brainers, but taken together, they're very significant developments, and they challenge some of us as membership organizations in deep ways. Let me start with the first, more global. Now, more of philanthropy is going cross-border than ever before. That means, for example, for me, I will have to adjust our lobbying efforts in significant ways to help ease the transfer of cross-border philanthropic funds. We have, from this insight, derived a European initiative to fight for a single market for philanthropy to remove all barriers to cross-border philanthropic money and engagement flows. It's also significant because more than ever before, philanthropists have the choice of where and how to incorporate or sort of pick the place and form for their philanthropic engagement. It's always been the case between Germany and Switzerland, for example, but now the choice is much, much bigger than before. If you want to work in the Global South, you may sort of pick any number of locations from which to engage philanthropically. And the solution space is global. The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are beginning to make a big difference in people's mindset about where the developing world is. It's everywhere. Those goals are all of our goals, and the solution space is global. More transparent. This is a big challenge for the sector in many ways. We see foundations, new foundations that are being started, sharing data in completely new ways, opening themselves up to participation, which is the next bullet point, sharing data in new ways, sometimes at odds with data protection, sometimes in line with open data dogmas. This is a very significant trend in my view. More collaborative. Andrew has spoken to the power of community philanthropy. I would add to that a related field, that of collective philanthropy. We see more and more foundations that are really collectives of individual donors coming together. And of course, the rise of digital platforms, the elimination of transaction fees has contributed to that and accelerates that greatly. And nowadays, if you want to engage globally with other donors, you can do so. You can do so through platforms. You don't necessarily need the confines of a traditional organization to do that. So we will find philanthropy in places outside of institutional philanthropy by the same people that are usually working inside institutional philanthropy. So the boundaries of this field are becoming much more blurred than ever before, which corresponds to the last point on this list, more entrepreneurial. We've had in most of our OECD economies a fairly stable dividing line between business and philanthropy. That dividing line is slowly going away. You can see it in the social entrepreneurship movement, but you can also see it in the social investment movement with the rise of corporate venture funds that are increasingly social venture funds that are working together or replacing corporate foundations. But you can also see it in the family office environment, where you really can no longer often, especially in the next generation context, distinguish between where's the philanthropy coming from. Is it coming from a philanthropist, a foundation, a family office, or a business leader? They're all the same. So the business models of philanthropy, that was a conjunction of words you didn't really have before. The business model of philanthropy is beginning to take shape in all sorts of different ways, partly driven by a continued depression of bond yields in the OECD world, certainly in continental Europe, which puts many foundations' funding model under pressure and forces them to become more entrepreneurial, but also in the ways that institutional philanthropy starts spin-offs and asks of the partners to become entrepreneurial and more self-sustainable over time. So this dividing line between a business on the one end and giving on the other hand is becoming very blurry. And if you take all of these together, I would contend that according to what we see across the world from the content flowing into the next philanthropy hypothesis initiative, the overall volume of philanthropy is growing much faster than we realize from our individual institutional viewpoints. I may see 22,000 foundations in Germany, but that doesn't mean I see philanthropy. And that gap is increasingly interesting for all of us, and it forces us to be much more open about what we support as a field and how we describe this field. I hope this has been somewhat interesting. Next slide. If it has been somewhat interesting for you, there's an easy way to stay on top of things. I've mentioned the hashtag NextPhilanthropy, but an even more convenient way would be a daily push news service that we have created through WhatsApp. All of those of you who have WhatsApp on their phones will be able to subscribe through the Next Philanthropy website to a free daily snippet of insight analysis from the Next Philanthropy initiative from our partners across the world. So it's a daily reminder of what may be next, and hopefully an interesting resource for all of us that keeps growing as we share it. So thank you for time, attention, and I'm not sure the organizers have provided a facility to ask questions.
Yes, they have. There's a question panel on the right-hand side of the screen, which I'm getting questions in now, so that's great. Felix, thank you very much. That's very interesting. Thanks for raising the points, highlighting what I already said about sort of the blurring of the boundary. It's interesting to see you're picking that very much in Germany, and the need for a sort of an ongoing resource that tells us what's happening on a sort of fairly daily basis. Allison, I'm going to come to you now, if I may, because time is always pressing. My next panelist is Allison Hollowell, who's Chief Strategy Officer of AVPN, a network of funders based in Singapore, which has now got over 500 members from, I think it's quite over 500, Allison, I'm sure you'll confirm this, from the Asian region and beyond, which makes it, for other reasons, make it the most significant piece of philanthropic infrastructure in the region. Allison, I think, is going to tell us about some of the newer models of philanthropy and the challenges and the possibilities they offer, and possibly about collaborative philanthropy too. So, Allison, over to you.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to everyone at Wings and for Felix for kicking us off. I just wanted to quickly give a separate plug to the WhatsApp channel that Next Philanthropy has been putting together, because I have been really enjoying getting that very curated article on a daily basis. That it happens to be oftentimes the one thing I do read in our sector, which is helpful to have it break through in a different channel. So I encourage everybody to sign up for that service. So I wanted to start by giving a short introduction to AVPN and where we're coming from in terms of our perspective on this sector. And so what we see right now in Asia is really a tale of two regions. On the one hand, we have numerous social challenges that are very complex, and we are one of the regions that is falling farthest behind in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. But on the other side, we are also the region that has the largest or the fastest growing wealth in the world, and Asia is set to be the world's largest concentration of wealth in 4 years. So there's a growing interest in local philanthropy to really start channeling some of this new wealth into solving some of the social challenges that we're seeing, particularly amongst the next generation of philanthropists, which in Asia is significant, considering that there's an estimated 35% of Asia's wealth that's expected to change hands to millennials in the next 5 to 7 years. So you really are seeing a huge amount of interest in philanthropy and social investment, as AVPN refers to it more broadly. But there's also a lack of infrastructure and talent, and so you're often seeing, family foundations that are struggling to find the right people to manage their philanthropy or their social investment, or corporations who are having CSR professionals that have no experience whatsoever in the sector. And so this is really where AVPN comes into play as a platform and as an advocate for the sector. Our mission is really to increase the amount of capital flowing into the social sector in Asia, and that capital is in addition to financial, also human and intellectual capital. And the second part of our mission is making sure that it's being most effectively deployed. So we do now have in Asia, or I should say globally, because our members are all around the world, we have over 500 members that span from everywhere from foundations and trusts to corporations and financial institutions, impact funds, government entities, private equity, venture capital, family offices, etc. And we as AVPN take a very broad approach to this ecosystem and see our role as breaking down the silos across the different social investors to really create more opportunities for collaboration and maximizing impact. One thing I think that we have seen in Asia in particular is this blurring of the lines between the different forms of social investment, as AVPN refers to it, and we use that term in Asia as an umbrella topic to cover everything from philanthropy through to impact investing and corporate CSR, or even sustainable finance. Basically, any capital that's looking to achieve impact, we are capturing under that term social investment. And our members are really leveraging everything from grants to debt and equity, all buffeted by the human and intellectual capital as well to maximize impact. So the first thing I wanted to cover in terms of what we're seeing as a trend, which certainly is echoing both what Andrew had pointed out in his opening remarks, as well as Felix's comments about what he's seeing in Germany and in Europe. I think it's even more pronounced in Asia, this continuum of capital that we're seeing with this blurring of the lines. So we're seeing philanthropists that are looking to move beyond grants to also leveraging debt and equity where it's appropriate to best serve the social purpose organizations that they're investing in. Similarly, you're seeing impact investors that are, of course, typically leveraging debt and equity, through a range of different return assumptions from both, whether it's impact first in terms of its drive or motivation, all the way to more finance first, market rate returns. But we're even seeing some impact investors that will leverage grants to help build the pipeline for impact investment down the line. So this is something that we see as really a trend that will continue to grow. And as funders are looking to use this broader set of tools, they're really focusing on what tool is best matched to the social purpose organization's needs, rather than limiting themselves to one of these. This can come through as a portfolio approach, or it can come through as collaboration happening across the different groups along the continuum. And so I have a couple examples to just very briefly highlight, since we don't have too much time here. But Nippon Foundation in Japan is a great example that's leveraging their influence to support both the social purpose organizations on the one side directly, and then on the other side really creating bigger infrastructure ecosystem plays through things like social impact bonds, as well as ecosystem building, where they're crowding in institutional investors. So they're taking more of a portfolio approach, trying to use their philanthropically minded capital to really directly support at a grassroots level, as well as build the ecosystem and try to bring in more mainstream capital to the conversation. Narada Foundation in Beijing similarly is looking at a portfolio approach and really see themselves as ecosystem builders. They launched the China Effective Philanthropy Multiplier program, which is really helping to scale what they see as effective social innovations. They are also similarly providing capital directly to social purpose organizations across a range of maturity, from seed stage to more growth stage. And then finally, they launched the China Social Enterprise Investment Fund, CSIF, to help build the collaborative ecosystem for impact investment in China. And they also take a big role in the capacity building of all of these different organizations. So again, a portfolio approach. Then Social Alpha is a bit of a different example, which I think touches more on the collaboration across the different groups across the continuum of capital. And they're really looking at filling the gaps. So in particular for early stage or even seed stage entrepreneurs and social ventures that may be facing some skepticism from impact investors, or certainly institutional investors that feel they're not quite ready yet to take on the larger capital or more stringent forms of capital. And so Social Alpha is using softer capital tools like convertible debt, soft loans with very favorable return assumptions and patient capital, if you will, to really help to build up the pipeline of these organizations from their partner, Tata, who has quite a deep bench of innovators and entrepreneurs on the very early stage, but then also India has, as we know, a very large ecosystem for impact investors. So they're trying to fill the gap or the missing middle that we see through this more concessionary or philanthropically minded capital. So that's something that I think we as AVPN are really pushing to see more of our members who are impact first in terms of their motivation, leveraging these different forms of capital to build the pipeline for impact investment as it becomes much more interesting in the region, especially amongst that next generation that I mentioned. So the second thing, and it's quite related to this continuum of capital concept, but it's this idea of adopting innovative finance vehicles. And it's something that I think we are currently, AVPN, partnering with Rockefeller Foundation and FSG, the consultants, to put together a report on innovative finance structures around the world, and the implications that this has for Asia. Because we are seeing that there's an increasing demand from clients for sustainable finance products. And it's related certainly to this global threat that social and environmental issues are going to have a potential to disrupt capital markets, and therefore we need to be leveraging all our capital, whether it's philanthropically minded or mainstream and market rate returns, thinking about what the impact is through things like ESG lenses, which in the U.S. certainly there's been a dramatic increase, as well as Australia and Europe. But Asia, it's still quite limited in terms of the products and portfolios that are available. But we are seeing that this is a growing trend, and something that, given that we're talking about philanthropy and where philanthropy plays a role in all of this, philanthropists in particular play a very important role across these three dimensions around innovation, demonstration, and diffusion. So from an innovation standpoint, this is really looking at how do we expand the scope of opportunities in sustainable finance by seeding these concepts and helping to support their growth with philanthropic capital. Demonstration, we're seeing from different elements. In some cases, it's foundations that are leveraging some of their endowment towards impact investing or towards sustainable investment, which we've seen through Ford Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation, among others. Or also partnering in blended capital deals where it's limiting the risk to crowd in institutional investors and sort of prove the use case for these products before they are become mainstream, and helping them to become mainstream, if you will. And finally, diffusion, so really helping to grow the visibility of these tools and make them more available and accessible to investors around the world. The purpose of our research with Rockefeller Foundation is to help identify additional opportunities in this space that philanthropic capital like Rockefeller's can come in and be catalytic in the growth in Asia. The third and final sort of trend that I wanted to touch on, which very much echoes both the report from a year ago as well as what Felix mentioned in his remarks, it's collaborative philanthropy. And in this case, I mean collective funders. We're seeing this bubbling up as a new and I think, I don't want to say necessarily innovative, but definitely something that becomes more of interest to Asian funders. And we have several members that I have listed here on this slide who are actively doing these types of collaborative funds. Social impact partners in Hong Kong and social investment partners in Japan are two great examples of venture philanthropy funds that are working across high net worth individuals, foundations, particularly family foundations, and venture capital and private equity funds, and helping to be the conduit between them and the social purpose organizations for them to invest in and to maximize and pool their capital. Kontai Foundation, based in Bangkok, has a collaborative group that's looking at focusing on good governance, which is quite innovative in Thailand, and they're really driving the charge for that. Some might remember Kontai Foundation actually was the sponsor of AVPN's conference in Bangkok 2 years ago, and that was the main reason for doing so, because they wanted to bring more attention to this collaboration opportunity that they had started. Credit Suisse is an example of a corporate who's really taking strides on this and breaking boundaries that we often don't see corporates able to partner with other corporates because of brand value and competition in amongst big multinational corporations. But they saw an opportunity in both Hong Kong as well as Malaysia to really convene a group of funders, both corporate funders as well as private funders that are focusing around education, and bring them together to pool their capital and agree on projects that they will vet and do impact measurement on together. And that's been really a successful initiative for them that they're looking to scale into other markets. DASRA is another example that many on this call are probably quite familiar with. They're giving circles, leveraging high net worth individuals. AVPN is actually working with them to start to bring some of their work into Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities in India, So we're really excited to kick off that partnership with them because they've been very successful in India on this collective funding initiative. And finally, Edelgive Foundation, which is another AVPN member in India, is also similarly looking to play that role of aggregator of capital, vetter of projects, and really coordinating this collaborative fund to maximize impact. So it's a definite growing trend, and one that we are really trying to promote and find additional opportunities to cultivate this in Asia. And the final thing I will say about this trend is the growing interest of international funders that are looking to tap into the growing wealth in Asia to start contributing to more global social and environmental issues through collaborative funds like Co-Impact. MacArthur just launched their Lever for Change program, which I think the release came out about an hour ago, so I can finally talk about it. And of course, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are working on multiple different avenues trying to promote this idea of collaboration over going it alone, and trying to really seed this concept and grow it in Asia to bring Asian philanthropists more to the table for these concepts. So these are some of the things that we think are driving the next sort of 12 to 18 months in Asia and the innovation that we'll see. And we hope that if you're interested in learning more about AVPN and our growing network, that you will join us for the AVPN conference, which is happening in Singapore on June 25th to the 28th. And I will share the link to everyone in the chat box to check out how to sign up for that event. Thank you.
Allison, thank you very much for that. So yes, kind of continuum of capital, innovative financial vehicles, and collaborative philanthropy, all three important trends. Interesting that all three of us panelists picked out the sort of blurring of lines between the for and non-profit sectors as a key one. So I'm going to bring in some questions now, which we've got here. We can decide amongst us how we divide them up. The first one we have got here is, how is technology changing philanthropy, and what are the main trends on this? Who wants to take this?
Well, I can take. This is Felix. I can take it with an example. This is such a broad question.
Go for it, Felix.
Is that okay?
Yes, by all means.
Yeah, let me just respond with one interesting example, and I'm sure others will come in on this very broad question. But this is accessible through the Next Philanthropy website. There's an English there was an English language breakfast meeting with the founder of the IOTA Foundation, which is the first foundation that we have in Germany that's founded on crypto capital, and it effectively owns the intellectual property to a Internet of Things architecture of microtransactions between machines. That's the foundation's endowment, effectively, the crypto capital. And the foundation is run collaboratively from people across the world, and it is very participatory in the way it's governed, and I think it embodies a number of changes that are the trends that have only been possible through technology and that would have been unthinkable just a couple of years ago. One is foundations are deeply many of the next generation foundations use technology as their operational backbone. So digital technology is where the foundation is. It's somewhere on the internet. It's a collaborative enterprise. So we see that quite a bit. Secondly, the endowment. The endowment may have data. You can see this in the Wikimedia Foundation, which essentially has the intellectual property of Wikimedia, but you also the Apache Foundation, the Mozilla Foundation. So you have digital foundations even when you look at the end in the endowment, and so I think that's just one very drastic way in which you can envision a very digital foundation. Maybe that's a helpful example to think of one extreme, and then of course there's everything on the way towards that extreme.
Felix, thank you. Allison, anything to add on that?
No, I think that is quite insightful from Felix to give that example. I think Asia is a little slower, I think, in terms of the technology, but quite a lot of opportunity there.
Right. That's unusual because it strikes me that Asia is often very quick to adopt technology, so that surprises me slightly. Hello? Okay. And let's move on to another question. The shrinking space of civil society, how is that impacting the next philanthropy space, do you think?
Well, I can again offer one example. I think it always becomes most visible through examples. We've seen the Open Society Foundations relocate their offices from Budapest to Berlin this past year, which is a very, very significant development in itself, but it becomes even more significant when you see it as the tip of the iceberg of a development that's been ongoing for a number of years. And the worrying thing is this doesn't happen against popular majorities, it happens with popular majorities. So next philanthropy will have to be much, much more conscious, I would say, about populist attacks. Independently funded civil society organizations are among the first victims of populist regimes. We can see this in a number of countries, and we have assumed for a long time that the arc of history will bend towards sort of independent philanthropy. It may not. We may live in a very different environment in our countries soon. So I think for next philanthropy, it means not only transparency, not only talking more about impact and all of these practices. It also means being much more aware of its own vulnerability and addressing and being more forthright in articulating the need for political protection. Building a citizen base is incredibly important. So those, I think, are some of the mechanisms in which next philanthropy is already and has to respond to what has become a very visible and consequence of the shrinking space right on our doorstep.
Thank you, Felix. I think it's worth reminding ourselves as well that in many ways philanthropy is kind of the handmaiden of civil society, and that it works generally through civil society organisations. So if they're under pressure, then that naturally limits the opportunities for funding that philanthropy has. But also, there are ways around this. It's worth next philanthropy will probably have to take account of this sort of thing happening and think of ways that it can help to mediate the closing space. So maybe more its attention needs to go to that as well. Allison, anything to add?
I mean, I think Asia in particular is challenged with this in the sense of all the different laws and regulations. I think around the civil society. You mentioned India. China is another one with the foreign NGO law. Vietnam being a communist country. I think there's quite a lot of political minefields to navigate in the philanthropy space in Asia, and something that we hear often from our international funders. How can we do more work around civil society and equality and human rights protections and all of these things? And it's definitely something I think that's quite challenging, and we don't yet have a clear answer for how to get around these things, other than the groups that are working at the grassroots. But I think for international organizations that are trying to come in and play a role there, it's still quite risky to do so.
Great, thank you, Alison. Another question here: are there any unexpected actors outside the third sector that can contribute to next philanthropy? I think the short answer from my point of view is yes, there are any number of them. Felix, Allison, any views on that?
Can you say it again, Andrew? Sorry, you cut out for just a second at the beginning of the question.
The question is, are there any unexpected actors outside the third sector who can contribute to next philanthropy? Well, obviously there are, but I wonder if you get any thoughts about who they might be. I think what we're seeing, what we've increasingly seen from the presentations as well, is that philanthropy is not just sort of confined to people who consider themselves to be philanthropists. Yeah, there's
Right.
a lot of things happening, and it's business.
That's what I was going to say.
Sure.
You know, thinking of AVPN as the diverse platform that I showed, I think it's quite clear that, in particular, business is playing an increasing role. You know, foreign actors are playing an increasing role in organizations, and how they can collaborate with one another. So I think it's a really varied group, and that's actually both the blessing and the curse of AVPN's network, because being as broad as we are, you know, we do struggle to have very concrete examples and advice for each of the different types of members that we have, but we really focus on the ways that these groups intersect with one another and can partner, because we do truly believe that there's not necessarily a right form of capital or a wrong form of capital, whether it's, again, financial, human, or intellectual, when I say capital, but that all of these groups play a role, and it's really about how we partner with one another. And I think, in particular, in the philanthropy space, we often see, you know, finance and private equity and mainstream capital as, you know, the dark side, but and have many conversations around greenwashing or impact washing happening amongst large financial firms that are starting to launch impact funds or things like that, or private equity groups talking about how they're achieving the SDGs. I think it's all a real positive, and something that, you know, we all have to put it in context as to what their primary responsibilities are, fiduciary or to society. But I think it's really important that we're all having the same conversation, or at least having, you know, a conversation about impact, and how each of us is related to that. And that's why the conference theme this year is Breaking Boundaries for AVPN, because we do feel that even though we had over 1,000 people at the AVPN conference last year in Singapore, it still felt a little bit like we were preaching to the choir, where everybody was already thinking about impact first, or at least deeply in their models. And we need to be really branching out to the broader groups if we have a hope of achieving the SDGs. We're going to need a lot more capital.
Interesting title for a conference, Allison. Very much so. You talked in your presentation about the sort of wealth transfer to the next generation. I've got a question here which sort of bears on that. It's, how will the wealth transfer to millennials, how will that impact next philanthropy?
Yeah, I mean, I think from what I started to talk about in the presentation, I think we see the next generation moving away a bit from this two-pocket syndrome, as we refer to it at AVPN, and thinking about, you know, making your money on the one side and then giving your philanthropy or giving back to society on the other side. We're seeing this convergence where people think of it as, young people in particular think of it as having one life and one set of assets, and they want to align their careers, their investments, and their values all together. And I think that that's a really positive trend that we're seeing, particularly with the theme of climate action. And I think so many young people are feeling like the older generation is leaving them with a broken planet, and they are wanting to see a change and really pushing for that. So you're seeing, you know, a lot of movements around the invest divest, how you can be moving your investments away from the sort of fossil fuels and polluting investments. And so I think that's something we'll see more of, and it's a very encouraging trend, I'd say.
Sure. So it's not just a question of more money coming into philanthropy; it's about aligning all your resources and your assets more effectively, really.
Yeah, I think so, and thinking more with innovation and how
Sure.
we can, especially in Asia, learning from the West and sort of leapfrogging some of the structures of philanthropy and the social sector that have happened in the U.S. and Europe and Asia is leapfrogging that a little bit.
Okay. Felix, anything to add to that?
Well, yes, maybe a concern or a cautionary note. I mean, this is something I talk about a lot and think about a lot, and I spend a lot of time with next-gen philanthropists, and there is a choice that we have to make as philanthropy practitioners where we want to draw the line. So in a very restrictive view, if we take a restrictive view of what institutional philanthropy is, a lot of what millennials are doing and will do will not count as philanthropy as we used to understand it. We will much more think of it as these are hybrid business practices. If we do that, our field will shrink in the next generation. I'm fairly certain. Now, the alternative is that we are aggressive about saying that's all, as AVPN is doing, that's all social investment. That's what we look at. And philanthropy is sort of simply the minus 100% position along a spectrum of financial returns, and we become sort of very open there. That will transform us as membership organizations as well. So that's a difficult line for all of us to navigate. I think, and a completely open question at the Association of German Foundations with very different viewpoints, legitimate viewpoints.
Felix, thank you very much. That's given us all plenty of food for thought. I think we're pretty much out of time there, so remains me to sort of wrap this up. We've had some very interesting points of view from all concerned, I think, and thanks to both Allison and to Felix for sharing their experience and their wisdom with us. Thanks to Wings for hosting this, and especially thanks to Nadia Hernandez and Bia Mion for making it happen, pressing the buttons and pulling the switches, so to speak. But most of all, thanks to all of you for taking part. I hope you've all got something to take away from this. It's been a pleasure talking to you and having you with us.
And thanks to Andrew for the facilitation. Bye, everybody.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. This is Nadia again. Thank you, Andrew, for your great moderation. Just a quick reminder that this webinar will be available on YouTube, and we will share the presentation deck with all the participants here. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.